So today we're brewing up a batch of beer, 5-gallon batch, using the reiterated mash method described by Chris Colby in BYO magazine, December 2007, and also on the Basic Brewing Radio podcast. First, what we need to do, we need to grind up our malt, and we're going to basically cut the malt bill in half and do one mash with half of the grain and the other mash with the other half. The idea here is we're doing a big beer, we're doing barley wine, and we want to not have to boil all day long. So if we use the runnings, the first runnings from the first mash and the second mash, we can build up the gravity that way. In addition, what we're going to do today is we're going to do a Partigyle. We're going to take the second runnings of the first mash and set that wort aside, and we're going to can it up using a pressure cooker to make starter wort for the future, for yeast propagation. The first mash is going to be all Pilsner malt, and that's because we want to avoid darkening the mash, or the wort, by putting the specialty malts in the first mash, and also because we want the second runnings to be starter wort, so that it doesn't necessarily need to have a lot of color to it. Alright, so let's get to milling the grain. So I'm adding the strike water to the ton with the grains already in place so as not to shock the enzymes. The idea here is we're going to go with a fairly thin mash because we want the first runnings to be on order of 5 gallons. We have 14 pounds of grain in there. We're going to go with a water to grain ratio of 2 quarts per pound of grain. So 7 gallons if it fits in the ton. I'm a little worried about that, it may not. So I've covered the mash tun so we avoid any significant heat loss. It turns out without the cover it loses 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit per hour, so that's a little much. So this will hopefully tone that down a bit. We've checked our pH, we're basically right at 5.2, and we're mashing at about 151 degrees. We are going to mash for 45 minutes as opposed to the 20 minutes suggested by Chris Colby, only because we want more or less complete conversion, so that our second runnings, which we're going to use in the Partigyle method for canning the wort, for starter wort, we need that to be fully converted. So we're going to run this one for 45 minutes, we're going to run off the first runnings and set that in the brew kettle until we do second runnings here, collect that wort for starter wort, for which we're going to can, and then we'll add the second set of grains and then pour the wort from the brew kettle into the mash tun, and again mash for 60 minutes. So we've dumped the first set of grains, we've added the new grains. Now I'm going to carefully pour in the wort from the first runnings of the last grain bed. We put this on the stove while we were collecting the second runnings and brought this up to about 160 degrees, so that by the time any thermal heat loss in the ton or the grains is taken into account, the mashing temperature will be somewhere between 140 and 150. That's the idea. Okay, so we've mashed our second set of grains, we've run them off into the brew kettle. We've got our first wort hops in here with a hop sack. We're going to try this for the first time to try to minimize the trub at the bottom at the end. We've collected a little more than 5 gallons, and we've got a little bit trickling out, another quart or so. So we're probably looking at 5.5 gallons going to the boil. Quick check of the gravity is very disappointing. We're at about probably close to 1080. Once you correct for temperature, it should have been more like 1110. So obviously very inefficient, more so than I anticipated. And we're going to boil for 60 minutes because we don't really have to boil off a lot of wort. And we're going to again do a sparge here to get more starter wort. Okay, well, we finally got the brew pot on the burner, bringing it to a boil. We're not quite there yet. Took the second runnings from the second grist and mixed that with the second runnings from the first grist. So we have about 4 gallons of starter wort that we're going to can, and we'll show you how that's done a little later. But for now, we've just got our first wort hops in. As soon as it begins to boil, we've got 3 ounces of Chinook that we're going to put in, also in the muslin bag, and let it boil for about an hour. We don't need to boil much longer because we're actually low on volume anyway. We'll hopefully end up with something in the order of 1100 for an original gravity. Alright, we've got it to a vigorous boil now. We just added our bittering hops, 3 ounces of Chinook, and because our gravities were a little lower than we wanted, I added a pound of turbinado sugar, raw cane sugar. Stirred that in very slowly, no caramelization ahead of time, just put it in straight. The idea is that that'll be 100% fermentable, more or less, and that's what we want. 57 minutes to go. Stay tuned. We are now at the end of our brew day. It was a very long brew day. It was about a 9-hour brew day, and we're still canning wort and pressure cooking it, but at least the barley wine is complete. It's behind me here, and it's happily working its way into fermentation. We ended up with about 4.5 gallons of original gravity 1.110. It wasn't bad. It was a little better than I expected it to be, but we did have to add the 1 pound of turbinado sugar. So hopefully we pitched about 400 milliliters of yeast slurry from a batch that we racked over yesterday, and hopefully this thing will take off overnight and there'll be lots of bubblies in the morning. So if you haven't had a chance to try reiterated mashing, give it a go. It'll be a long brew day, but it's a lot of fun, and in the end you'll hopefully have something good to show for it. Cheers.